Okay. Today, I'm very happy to have with me at Known Heretic, Amy E. Sousa. Amy has a Master's of Arts in Depth Psychology, as well as 20 years experience as a theater educator, and is an engaged embodiment expert using boundaries, somatic development, theater, and depth psychology to help people strengthen their intuition, imagination, and inner authority building. I became aware of Amy on Twitter recently through her various videos and posts regarding the intersection of women's rights and trans rights, and I've asked Amy to join me for a discussion on gender ideology and the growing influence it has to explore where it comes from and where it's going. Most people have heard the growing cry for an acknowledgement of trans rights and their inclusion in society. So with Amy's help, we're going to look at this topic from different perspectives and explore the psychology behind those who identify as trans and ask questions about the implications of allowing gender ideology to be integrated into the education system and working world. Amy, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So this is a discussion that I know is like a hot issue for a lot of people, and depending on where you lie on this argument, on this debate, people have very intense emotions around this, and depending on who you talk to, you'll get a different perspective. Now, I'm coming from a certain perspective, and what I realize is that in doing so, certain people are going to identify me as having a certain bias in certain regards. For me, just to kind of give you a background of kind of where I come into this conversation, I would say that probably about 10 years ago, I was really making an effort in my own life to try to be more open-minded, to try to be more inclusive. And in the milieu of that conversation, of course, trans rights became something very like obvious in that discussion. And it has become more so as time has gone on. It's kind of grown to a fever pitch at this point. And I would say that for myself, when I first started looking into it, just kind of as a curious observer and just kind of wanting to educate myself on the discussion, what really gave me pause was when the discussion shifted away from trans rights or humans' rights to trans women are women. That was, for me, the moment that the trans movement took a hard turn into a direction that I'm like, okay, I got to get out now. You know what I mean? Pull over. I got to get out. I wish you the best, but if you're going to draw that line in the ground and you're going to make that distinction, and then you're going to demonize anybody who doesn't agree with you, then as far as I'm concerned, you've gone too far now, and I have to get out. I can't go any further. So just by saying that will already put me into a certain category. You know, I mean, certain people are going to hear me say that and they're going to already be upset. And I have already had this conversation several times with several people over Twitter and through different things. And what I find interesting is that I can say I support a person's right to be trans, but if I don't say that a trans woman is a woman, then suddenly I get put into a category of being a bigot and being regressive and all these kinds of things. So that's where I kind of sit in this discussion, is I'm looking at this and I'm like, okay, and I think a lot of people are like this. I want to be open-minded. I want to be inclusive. I don't want to be like hating on people unnecessarily. But there's been this ideological line that has been drawn in the ground. And if you are on one side or the other of it, depending on what side of it you're on, you'll be perceived a certain way. And in this case, if you're on the side of, the way I see it, trans women are trans women. I don't see what's wrong with that. But if you don't say trans women are women, then you're immediately put on let's say, the right side of this equation, like in terms of people's perception, right? It's like, oh, you must be a right-wing conservative bigot. And I don't perceive myself as being right-wing at all, and we can kind of get into that further. However, I, like many people, did grow up in church, and I do, I had parents who raised me, and, fairly normal in that regard, right? So this is, and I mentioned this to you before, this is one of the reasons why I feel like it's an important discussion to get into, because this is something that is going to affect my nephews and nieces much more than it ever would have affected me.
Yeah.
This was not a discussion at all when I was in school, when I was growing up. When I was in school growing up, it was very much focused on the rights of homosexuals and like integrating homosexuals and being like, where we can't demonize homosexuals. And I think from a conservative perspective, it kind of feels as though the goalposts got pushed a lot further down, and it was like, okay, no, we're going to need you to be this much more inclusive than we've already asked you to be. And in this case, we're going to ask you to include trans women as a category of femininity. So with all of that in mind, Amy, how is it that you came into this discussion? I've seen your videos, and so I kind of know where you're coming from. For anybody who's new to you, like, where do you come in on this?
Yeah. So I come to this from, I guess, multiple different perspectives, but I would say, just first of all, before I go into that, I just want to observe just how delicate you're being and how careful you're being with how you phrase these things. And if we were talking about flat earthers right now, you wouldn't be dancing around whether or not the earth is flat and what flat earthers think of you, and do flat earthers call you a bigot for knowing that the earth is round? Right. I understand reality. I understand gravity affects me. I understand the earth is round. And I understand that humans follow a developmental pathway. There's two of them. And everyone is a fully sexed being. Everyone is a fully sexed being. And so just that's my perspective. You're right. Is reality. Right. I come from a reality perspective.
I'm a fan of reality.
Yeah, it's a great place to live. But sort of where I was pulled into the conversation is I too was raised Christian. I was raised in a pretty fundamentalist Christian household. I learned things like men are the head of the household, women are made to submit to men's will. My sister had this in her wedding vows. She was like, I submit to leadership, and he was like, I promise to be your loving leader. So these were some things that I butted heads against in my childhood. I have a great relationship with my parents now. They are wonderfully supportive. They're great people. I don't demonize them in any way, but that religion I did confront and butt heads with, and I found it restrictive for me. I couldn't see myself in those roles. So I couldn't see myself in those roles. I moved to New York at 18. I did theater. I really discovered a lot in the theater. That's not important, but the important thing is I did go on to teach it. And because of my upbringing, one of the things that I always tried to instill in my students was to be their unique selves. I felt that part of how I raised, I was confronting this need to be my unique self, but feeling, the constriction of very specific roles. So when I would teach, I would say to students things like, fabric or clothes are just fabric. And fabric is gender neutral. Makeup is just face paint. And face paint is gender neutral. Every culture across time and history has had adornments, and these adornments are benign. They're neutral in themselves. It is only culture that gives these adornments any kind of status or meaning. We've ascribed meaning to the adornments, but in themselves, the adornments are totally neutral. So I was always trying to, help the students that I work with explore this, and I did what I did with them was a lot of play creation. So I was asking them to develop their own characters so that they could write their own plays, so that they could express their unique values in their unique voices. And this has always been my sort of underlying value set. It's where I'm coming from. And then, so a thing happened, which was, Me Too movement happened. I'm gonna sort of go through this really quickly. Me Too movement happened. It was revelational in many ways for me. I came out with my own story of my rape and what I went through. I felt extremely empowered in that moment with all of these women sharing their stories to share my own. And, that's a huge boundary violation. So I've done a lot of processing and a lot of work around what that means and how to recover and what it is to have boundaries. And what it is to dissociate from my body and what it is to be fully embodied, because trauma response is often dissociation. So after Me Too, we had the Women's March. Women wore pussy hats. Women were all in. You just saw this sea of pink, all across Seattle or whatever state you were in. And then there was, on the Seattle Women's March page, there were a group of men who called themselves trans women, and they were saying that pussy hats were phobic. And I had not yet really confronted this. And I was like, surely not. Surely vaginas are not phobic of anything. Surely not. And I sort of started engaging with these guys. And I was like, if there is one place where vaginas should absolutely be centered, that's going to be a woman's march. Vulvas, vaginas, women's reproductive processes. This is about women. It's about our reproductive biology. This is what we're centering here. This is not phobic of anyone. And these men persisted in, the sort of, cult mantra that you hear, trans women are women. And they doxed me.
What year was this?
What
year was this?
I think it was actually the second Women's March that this happened. So I want to say it was like 2016, 2017. Okay. 2016, 2017. So they got my personal information. They found my phone number. They started harassing me. It was very scary and upsetting, but I was also deeply troubled in a curious way. Like before, I had sort of been where you are, where I was like, trans women are women, but I had just been like, whatever you say, but also this is not phobic. And anyway, because of that doxing and harassment, which was so forceful, and they were so sort of hateful and angry at what I thought were very benign statements that I was making. It actually motivated me to really research what was going on, because I was like, this is disturbing. This is ultimately a group of men ganging together to harass me. Like, what the hell? So that's how I started, and that's how that's when I took to Twitter and became known heretic. But I noticed along the way that a lot of things were happening. So the propaganda has been highly effective. That's why you were tripping over your words in the beginning. That's why you were like so delicately balancing over, how you're going to frame this, because if we were just having a conversation that is grounded in reality, if we're going to talk about this table, if we're going to talk about this room, if we're going to talk about I'm going to drop this, I'm going to drop the cup, what do you think is going to happen, we are in agreement about physics and how they work and reality and how it's going to respond. We know how reality is going to respond. But the propaganda around this movement has been highly, highly effective. And the first thing that has really been done is that force teaming. So they've really done an effective job of force teaming themselves with LGB rights.
Right.
But in reality, that T has nothing to do with the LGB. It's not an orientation. And in fact, LGB is rooted in the biological reality of sex. It's a sexual orientation that is beyond the immediate control of the will. It's an embodied response. That's what LGB has always been fighting for, because it's a like born this way situation. This is my embodied response. This is who I'm attracted to. This is beyond my control. If I could, I think people are very open and embracing of themselves now, but I think, there was a time when people were like, yeah, if I could have just been born, in a way that went along with the crowd, I would have, but this is beyond my control. And now we want to marry who we want to marry. And that was really, the biggest goal of that, or one of the biggest goals, also effectively grappling with AIDS. But it was always a movement rooted in biological reality. And no one who is LGB is asking anyone else to redefine reality. They're simply saying, I want to love who I want to love and go my own way. But by sort of force teaming themselves into this movement, that T has really co-opted and it's basically worked psychologically in people's minds, because they think that they're being homophobic if they don't go along with this. But in fact, as many gay and lesbian women and men will tell you, this ideology is in fact itself highly homophobic. This is these the same kind of men who doxed me. These are the same kind of men on the dating app harassing lesbians for being genital fetishists, because these lesbians don't want to sleep with men, no matter what the men call themselves.
One of the instances that I've used in conversation with other people is talking about Iran, and how in Iran homosexuals are killed, and so they're encouraged to transition. And I think that this is a strong indicator of kind of where a lot of the trans ideology comes from. And it is sort of homophobic on some level, right? It is kind of like a rejection. You're saying like, I must be a woman because I feel this way about this, or I must be a man because I feel this way about this. And it's in this kind of a rejection. This is kind of what I feel like is like sometimes people will like, a woman will identify as a man because she doesn't like the disempowerment. And so she'll sort of like identify as a man, thinking that that will give her agency and power in the world, and vice versa as well. I think a man will identify as a woman because he perceives it to some degree as being a way of having agency and power in the world. And if I can just kind of go down that direction a little bit, like it's something that I have had thoughts about when it comes to where has this movement come from, and why is it that in this kind of wave of feminism and female empowerment, there's like this infiltration team coming into that, and that makes me wonder, why do they want to do that?
Well, this is absolutely an anti-women's movement. This is a
Sure.
women hate movement. I mean, this is a movement of boundary violation. This is a movement of extreme objectification, dissociation, disembodiment, dismemberment. This is an anti-human campaign. This is a campaign to try to divorce humans from their embodiment. You know, there's
technology, the advance of technology seems to really have an effect on that. And that to me seems to be a part of this discussion. Is I feel that if I was to say what my feeling is that for a lot of people, trans is sort of like a techno religion. It's a belief in our ability to transcend our physical forms through the use of technology, and for us to evolve. And there's where I feel like it's sort of this, and when you kind of are like, the way I kind of see it is like, if you're looking at the future and you're sort of looking at our evolutionary pathways and where we can go, I do think this is incredibly important discussion to have in terms of how we progress as humanity. Because if we can't figure out this sort of specific nuance, then, you know what I mean, it could have some very dramatic implications in the future. And I'm a gamer. I like to play video games and stuff like that. And as such, I can see how there's a certain amount of influence in that. Like, I'm like, you know, just I try to be critical of my own communities. And it's something that I can see how that anybody who's very deeply ingrained in tech and in the digital world and all of that kind of stuff, they're very much inclined in this direction. And it's gone. This trans women are women thing is an example to me of sort of a denomination of thought that's sort of going on in this certain direction. You can understand what I mean by denomination of thought, right? You know, sort of going on in this direction, and it's and you know, and you are a heretic for going against it, as am I to a certain degree, you know. But I mean, you know, if anybody who's had to leave their background, their religion, their church, you know what I mean, we're all heretics, right? So it's nothing new.
You know, and being a heretic, like, you know, leaving the church that I grew up in, I have a very clear understanding of how fundamentalist thinking works. This is fundamentalist thinking. The thinking of this ideology is fundamentalism. It's a cult. It's not based in any truth that's grounded in reality. You know, all men are equally physically men. All women are equally physically women. You know, people will often try to bring up DSDs, which colloquially we call intersex. People will try to bring up these DSD conditions as some sort of proof that there are multiple sexes. Well, in fact, that is very dehumanizing to people with DSD conditions. People with DSD conditions are still male or female. And in fact, DSD conditions are themselves sex-specific conditions. And, you know, there are still two possible developmental pathways. There are still two possible gamete productions. You know, there's eggs and sperm. There's not spregs. There's no other thing that humans can make. There is no third or other sex. There are two. And
humans don't reproduce asexually.
No. And one of the things that I often ask people, you know, I know that a lot of women and activists who are in this go down the path of saying, well, what is a woman, you know, and they get in the woman, adult, human, female argument. You know, and that's all well and good, because that is what a woman is, an adult, human, female. But I often try to get those ideologues and cultists to answer the question, okay, so if you are telling me that your identity is woman identity and some other people's identity are man identity, then what's the definition of that? What are the definition of woman identity? If woman is divorced from a physical embodiment, then what is it? What's that identity? No one ever answers that question. I've asked it hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, and all I get is crickets, because they know if they go down that path, then what they're talking about is stereotypes. The very same stereotypes that I've been fighting since I was a little girl. You know,
Sure.
the stereotypes that say pink is for girls and blue is for boys. That's
Sure.
what they're saying. This is based on stereotypes. And there's a lot of propaganda, as I said, that's being used, and including what you talked about, inclusivity. This idea of inclusivity is not benign. You know, that
Right.
idea of inclusivity, that is a tool. It's a wedge that's being used at the expense of boundaries. You know, we live in a bounded universe, frankly. You know, we live in a material universe. Everything is bounded. Everything has a boundaries. And, you know, these boundaries are incredibly important. They're incredibly important for women, and they're incredibly important to teach to children. Children deserve to have boundaries around their bodies. All of us deserve to have boundaries around our bodies.
Sure.
And so, you know, the notion of inclusivity is, you know, it's useful when you're having a 3rd grade birthday party and you want to invite the whole class. That's very nice. It's very nice to be inclusive. You invited the whole class. No one was left out. No one had hurt feelings. But when I am going to go and get changed and be naked, no, that is not the time to be inclusive.
Sure.
That is a time to have boundaries around my body and to say, you know what, women only. And it's really gaslighting for men to pretend that they don't know why those spaces are for women only. You know, we still live in a culture that is very much a rape culture. We still live at a time where, you know, over 99% of all rapes are committed by men, and over 80% of all victims are women. You know, if we were equal physically, that would not be the case. If we were equal physically, women would not be victims of this. We would fight back. You know, we would just be like, punch someone in the face and be like, get out of here. You know, but the fact of the matter is, we're smaller. Men are bigger. If you have eyes and you have been to a public place, you can see it. You can just observe it, observe reality. You know, this whole thing is just freaking gaslighting, trying to get us to divorce ourselves from material reality. You know, it's trying to get us to pretend something against our own senses, our own sense perceptions. They're trying to get us to go against our own sense perceptions. And we can go deeper down this path, because I'd love to talk about just how horrifying this is, what we're doing to children. And this is why I think the adults in the room have to frigging stand up. Because kids cannot consent to this. And we are grooming and abusing kids in plain sight by indoctrinating them into this dissociative thinking that divorces them from their bodies, it divorces them from their instincts, and it divorces them from their sense perceptions.
Yeah, there's just this recent story, and I can't remember what her name was, but it's a teacher who was fired because she was grooming specific children. Right, they were targeting specific children to try to get them into their trans group in order to indoctrinate them, is the way I see it. Right, you know, it's and now it all came out. This. I believe it was a girl was identifying as a boy, and then suddenly their parents found out about it and had no clue what was going on. And to kind of go back to sort of where we started in the beginning, like this is sort of where some of the hesitation comes from, speaking overtly about this stuff, because there has been a certain amount of intimidation created around it, right?
Oh, yeah.
To even talk about it is, at this point, could cost you your job. It could threaten your life, because a lot of times people get doxxed and stuff like that. So there is some hesitation when talking about this, simply from the perspective of, I know that no matter what I do, there's certain people who are going to disagree with me just simply on the basis that I'm not following their line of thinking. And the reason that I'm so vehemently against that was because I spent 23 odd years in that sort of mindset, and it took me that long to get out of it. So I can see it when when it's coming, right?
Yep.
So it's that's where this has gotten to a point to where it's definitely worth talking about, because it's affecting children growing up who are, like you say, they're becoming disembodied by this ideology, and they're choosing surgery and medical hormones and different things like that, right? And they are then many times becoming let's say subservient to their medicalization for a lifetime.
Yeah.
And that's I believe it's Jennifer Billick who is constantly saying it's capitalism, stupid. And
it is. Yep.
Yeah,
She's great.
yeah,
I love Jennifer.
yeah. So this kind of goes into, I kind of think about the reasons why somebody would want to spend an extraordinary amount of money on surgeries and whatnot in order to find themselves, in order to kind of find themselves, right? It's this kind of for some people, I kind of feel like it has to do with having too much money and not knowing what to do with it. And then for other people, sorry?
Go on, we'll finish and I'll go on.
And then for other people, I think it's, they don't necessarily have the money, but then they start growing with this desperate feeling of like, oh, this is what I need to do. And so they're going and maybe saving a bunch of money or getting loans or who knows what they're doing, right? In order to latch themselves into this community, which is very accepting of people coming into it. But there's so much that we could talk about in terms of like the psychology behind why people would go in this direction.
Well,
and
marketing. I mean,
Sure.
The marketing is extremely effective, and you have to remember that even those of us who weren't born with this ideology growing up, we are still born into a culture where mass marketing is constantly influencing our lives and our preferences and
Sure.
how we express ourselves. Someone that your audience would probably love is the deprogrammer, and she's got a YouTube, and she goes into the Bernays effect. So for those of you who don't know who Bernays is, he was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, and he is the advertiser behind the big tobacco marketing campaign. So he didn't just market tobacco. He didn't just try and say, hey, smoke tobacco, smoke cigarettes, they're cool. He tapped into Hollywood. He tapped into the fashion industry. He tapped into advertising. He tapped into television. This is the birth of implanted symbols happening everywhere, so you see it, in the movies that you watch, in the television that you watch, in the advertisements that you see, in the grocery store, in everywhere. These messages are being, just under the surface, always being targeted and marketed to you, and so it influences your sense of becoming. This is how this kind of marketing, this psychological marketing, works, and it's happening on a massive scale that it's hard for us to really imagine unless we're someone who researches this. Unless you're a person who is really interested in culture jamming, unless you're a person who's really interested in like ad busting and looking at these things, even though like an advertisement is trying to sell you something, you're not really thinking about the fact that your television programming, like the actual series that you're watching, is selling you something. That movie is selling you something. So
Sure.
We've been sold a lot of things already. I mean, it influences, like, these are the clothes that I happen to be wearing. This is, how I've done my face for this. Like, it influences. It's influencing me right now, sitting
Sure.
here with you.
Right.
So none of us are truly above this influencing, and the marketing is always, there's always, the story is pretty much the same. If you do X, then you will feel good. If you do
Sure.
X, so it's always, this is kind of where my embodiment stuff comes in, because it's always, an external. If you do this external thing, then you'll feel good inside. But there's no money in telling you that you have to feel good first, and then, then you get what you want. There's no widget.
Sure.
There's no widgets to be sold from telling you that information. So, those people who have been caught by the idea that they can somehow be authentic by having extreme body modification and a lifelong regimen of medicalization and wrong sex hormones, this has very much been sold to them, and it's everywhere. Everywhere in culture, this is being sold to them.
Sure.
And it's not just, again, this is very Bernaysian style, because it's not just being sold to them by movies and Hollywood and their favorite celebrity and their favorite runway model and advertisement. It is also being sold to them by their doctors, by their clinicians, by their therapists.
Wow.
There are over 700 gender clinics in the United States. 10, 15 years ago, there were like 30. There are over 700 now. When you look at that, you can see
it's like
how
Starbucks on every corner.
Exploded. It's just exploded. This is, I think it's GLSEN, GLSEN. Jennifer Billick reports this, but basically the industry says it about itself. This industry, the industry of transition, the transition industry, is a $3.6 trillion industry. It's industry, it's money. Forbes magazine, maybe I think in May of last year, talked about, if you are not invested in this already, get invested in trans tech. This is the fastest growing market. You can look that up. Forbes magazine is talking about it. This is simply, it's money, but the people who are falling claim to it, the unfortunate thing is they're not just a person like you could say, oh, well, I have eyeliner on my eyes right now because I'm influenced. I myself am influenced by the beauty industry. I've been influenced, and it worked on me. I did it. But at least, first of all, I can see that it's advertising very clearly. If I went to my doctor and I was like, I don't feel good, I don't know what's going on with me, and my doctor was like, let me prescribe you some eyeliner.
Right.
That's fucked up. That's fucked up. So, or let me prescribe you a tattoo. Let me prescribe you some ear gauges. Let me prescribe you piercings. Like, they are prescribing these external extreme body modifications for what is an internal delusion. This is a delusion. And for a lot of the kids, like this kid, Kai Shipley, who got like Time Kid of the Year just a few weeks ago. Right. If you go back and look at documentaries of that kid, the documentary Trans America that was on Netflix a few months ago, you can see his mom literally saying, we worried he was going to grow up and be gay, and we spanked him and we spanked him and we spanked him, and he still wanted to wear a dress. Well, I'm hearing that. I'm asking myself, let the friggin' kid wear a dress. Who cares? Dress is fabric. It's just fabric cut into a shape. Let him wear it. It doesn't mean he is any less of his body than he is. And this,
isn't that strange? Isn't that strange how people are like, it does seem like it's strangely coming from the more conservative mindset, where it's just like, I can't handle the idea of my kid being gay, so there must be some other explanation.
Child.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's as they say, sexualizing kids at a very young age, and kind of assuming that they know more than they do. You know, kids are tabula rasa in a lot of ways, right? Blank slates when they're born, and so they're soaking in from their environment, right?
You're like, there's an Easter bunny, there's a tooth fairy, and they're like, okay,
yeah,
they're freaking
yeah,
kids.
sure.
You can do anything. You can tell them anything.
Yeah. I mean, I know that because I grew up in Sunday school and everything, right? So it's like I kind of have some connection to that. So that's partly why I can connect to what's happening right now with kids and how they're sort of being indoctrinated into these belief systems. And it's disturbing to see, because it basically seems, I would describe it as like a modern inquisition.
Oh yeah.
You know, it's this kind of new religion on the block, and there's an inquisition going on, and it's like, okay, you know, you got to make sure that you're in line with our doctrine, otherwise, you know, we're going to burn you at the stake of public opinion.
Some people are calling it the Tranish Inquisition.
Well, there you go. Yeah, that sounds about right.
Absolutely. You know, a woman who I follow and she follows me just posted, I won't say her name because I am not 100% sure, but maybe I'll share it later if she wants me to. But she just wrote a letter to her school because her kid used accurate sex-based pronouns about another kid, and the kid then got in trouble. And she basically wrote to the teacher and was like, no, you will not be gaslighting my kid.
Right.
And this is the whole thing, you know, for kids, anyone will tell you, anyone who has worked in sexual trauma, anyone, Gavin de Becker talks about it in his book, The Gift of Fear, which is about how to have safe boundaries and how to keep yourself safe. You know, you need to be able to rely on your sense perceptions, rely on your intuition, rely on your instincts. He calls that book The Gift of Fear because he's talking about being able to rely on your primal instincts. When that primal instinct of fear comes up in you, you need to be able to instantly respond to it. And if you are dissociated from your sensory perceptions, if you are dissociated from your primal responses, that is putting you in a grave space of danger. And that is what we are doing to kids right now. That is why I am a very hardliner about accurately sexing my fellow human beings. There's nothing offensive about understanding that I'm an animal and not a plant. There's nothing offensive about understanding that I'm a mammal and not a reptile. There's nothing offensive about understanding that I'm a primate and not a rodent. And there's nothing offensive about understanding that I am a woman and not a man. These are physical categories. They describe my physical experience. They describe how my body functions in more and more discrete ways. And kids need to understand this. They need to be able to rely on their direct sensory perceptions. This is like the big lesson of Little Red Riding Hood. You know, she's using her sense perceptions. What big eyes you have, what big ears you have, what big teeth you have. She's honing in to those sense perceptions to figure out, I am not safe right now. I am not in a.
You're describing Jeffrey Marsh right now.
Yeah, he's so friggin' scary. He's
man, he does creep me out. Like it's one of those things where I try to be like compassionate as much as possible, but yeah, when I see his videos, I'm just like,
he's grooming others. Jeffrey Marsh is a grandma, what big teeth you have situation. I'm looking at him and I'm saying, Grandma, what big teeth you have. This is not safe. You are grooming kids. You know, kids need, first of all, accurate language to talk about their bodies, and they need accurate language to talk about others. They need reality affirmed around them. They are trying to understand the universe, and they need the adults in the room to affirm reality. If the adults in the room are participating in preferred pronouns or lying about reality, this has now caused a cognitive gap for the kids. And this has also, basically, this tells the kid that you cannot rely on your own sense perceptions to keep yourself safe. You need an adult to mediate the environment around you. You need to have this construct explained to you to mediate your reality, and you are not in a position where you are safe to understand how to mediate your immediate environment. That's a dangerous situation for a child to be. That puts a kid in a prime position to be preyed upon by anyone. You know, this anti-reality language it causes confusion, it causes cognitive dissonance. You know, and it tells them that their own sensory responses are no longer reliable for them. It divorces them from their primal instincts, you know. Sure. And for kids to have boundaries, we need to affirm them in those instincts. We need to affirm them in reality. It helps them have good boundary setting skills. You know, otherwise they don't know what the boundaries are. You know, they're in this place of dissonance.
Part of what so I'm looking at a certain angle in this discussion, and it's something that I've talked about before. It's just how we've really hit a paradigm shift when it comes to where we're getting our authority as a society, where it used to be that we used to get it from church and we used to get it from, you know, kind of our local community. But now that has really been stripped down in a lot of ways, and especially because of you know, smartphones and the internet and whatnot. Kids are really getting their cues and everything from that, and they, I think, are very often looking at their parents, especially parents who are more traditionalists and religious and whatnot, and they see them as being regressive and as being, you know, and I'm kind of speaking from my own experience, because this to some degree was my experience coming out of the church, right? Is that at some point I felt, you know, like it was really a hindrance to me operating effectively in the world, because I was kind of like trying to get the world to work on, you know, based on these certain rules and the belief of how it was supposed to work, right? So once I had divorced myself of that, and now I'm in just sort of the wilderness of uncertainty. You know, like once you've deprogrammed yourself, like how do you reprogram yourself? And when you're looking at what's happening right now with the younger generation, you know, they're very much growing up, and a lot of them, yeah, their parents are there, you know, in some form or fashion, but they really are picking up their social cues and whatnot from TikTok and from Google and et cetera, from video games. You know, the Bible can't compete with video games. You know what I mean? Like, unfortunately, there's a lot of kids who they would much rather be playing Fortnite than reading the story of Daniel and the Lion's Den. You know what I'm saying? I know it's a shocker, right? But then this is I think part of the problem that we're dealing with here is there's kind of this vacuum that's been created, and there's this exciting thing that's happening that we're walking around with these oracles in our hands, you know, where you can basically come up with any answer you could possibly want. But a lot of the information is so distorted and fractured that trying to find information that is solid and based on, you know, solid fundamentals of reality is the trick. And isn't that funny that we live in that world, you know, where we can have this amazing invention, the internet and all these devices, and there's such an example of human ingenuity and intelligence, and yet the information that's out there is so distorted. It's hard to sift through it all and hard to understand, you know, what can I latch onto that's real.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think there is a huge issue of externalizing authority. And if you look at the tenets of this cult religion, you will see that external validation is one of the huge tenets. So we are currently seeing a movement teach children and adults that they require constant external validation, which is sort of hilarious to me because, you know, anyone who has gone down like a path of, you know, like Jungian or Freudian analysis, or a Buddhist path, or
I'm a Jung fan personally.
yeah, I'm definitely a Jung fan myself, but or a let's say, or even a meditation path. You know, the whole goal of these things is to get to a place where you are not relying on external authority. You're not relying on the external programming and culture. You are at a place where you're basically meeting the self, and you're meeting your sort of your true self, or your higher self, or whatever.
Is that individuation? Are you talking about?
Individuation. I mean, it does.
Yeah.
You know, the language.
I'm a fan of it.
Yeah, the language doesn't exactly matter, but what matters is you are in a place where you are finding internal authority. You know, these are what those self-development is about. I don't need someone, you know, to tell me like, you know, you are pretty, or you are a good person, or you are you know, successful, or I don't have to wait for the world to reflect me and give me accolades and tell me that I'm good or successful in the world's eyes, because I am so grounded in a place of myself that I have the authority in myself to say, oh, I know I'm good. Oh, I know I'm beautiful. Oh, I know I'm, you know, successful, because these are things that I feel them. They're embodied. I feel these things. This is how I feel about myself. It's not something I'm seeking externally. It's the way that I am being. But this movement is an external validation movement where they are told other people have to affirm your identity. Other people have to participate in these pronouns. Other people owe you these things. And if you are not getting them, then maybe you're going to commit suicide. Then maybe you're going to be very distressed. Then maybe you are going to be these things. So again, this is programming. Kids are
that's insidious programming for sure.
And then someone, you know, doesn't affirm them, and they collapse, because their entire sense of self is based on how other people are receiving them. That again is, well, it's really unhealthy, but think about it. Who does that work for? That works for consumerism. You know, that works for a profit-driven system. You know, that keeps you buying in. Then you're like, well, I'm gonna get the feminization facial surgery. I'm gonna take more tea. I'm gonna buy in. I'm gonna do it more until I can get the external validation that I require. You know, and you know, this is one of my huge value sets. You know, my value sets are really, you know, embodiment, that we are all fully embodied, whole human beings. My values are boundaries. You know, we all deserve to have boundaries around our bodies. And my other value is internal authority. You know, that this is, there are practices that we can do to help us build an internal authority. And those practices are generally experiential practices. And it can be, I mean, for me, that was why I taught theater, because for example, a child would learn by going through a process of character development, creating lines for that character, making a play with other students, that whole learning process is an experience. What we learn from experience, that's something we embodied. We know it. No one can take it away from you. You know, we are in a world where external authority is given so much power. We've really, as a human species, given away so much of our power. My expert says this. You know, you say something on Twitter and people are like, "Where's the research?" You know, and a lot of the time, you know, I'm always telling people, like, you know, it doesn't take an expert. It does not take an expert to know that men are men and women are women. It doesn't
Sure.
take an expert to know that gravity works. It doesn't take
Right.
an expert. An expert can
Right.
explain why gravity works, but I don't need an expert to tell me if I drop something, it's going to fall and not float. You know, it doesn't take an expert. I can rely on my own sense experience. And when we rely on experts only, not that they're not useful for certain scenarios, but
Sure.
when we have given all of our power to them, then it can get supplanted. You know, when we did think, you know, hundreds of years ago that the earth was flat, it did get supplanted by the earth being round. When we thought there were, you know, 8 planets, it got supplanted by the fact that we discovered more planets. Facts can supplant newer, different facts. But the things that I learn experientially through my own either creative processes or things that I've learned, you know, for example, frankly, from my trauma, these are not things that can ever be taken away. That knowing cannot be taken away. Like, for example, no one can tell me you don't deserve boundaries, because I've been through a trauma. I've gone through an experience. I've already experienced what it is not to have my boundaries violated. So no one can tell me differently, because that knowing that I have, that's in me, that's in my body. I know that.
Yeah, what blows me away, I've had this discussion with people several times now, where when you talk about the idea of allowing males to self-identify as female, there's this belief, this strange, naive belief that there's going to be no problems with that. That, like, the data show, like I was talking to somebody the other day, the data shows, statistics show that there is no percentage of increase in risk to women by allowing trans women in the same bathrooms with them and stuff like that. And it's just like, well,
There
you're
are
obviously having
examples.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I constantly am saying. Like, and this is actually what I said. I'm like, I really don't want to have to carry a file in my computer of all of the different heinous examples I've seen. I don't want that on my computer, but it seems like every single time I talk to somebody like this, it's like it's like now I have to send them basically porn of people, you know, wanking off in the bathroom, or you know, I believe it was you who sent me the picture of somebody with an appendage coming out of their stomach. You know what I mean? Like it was a penis basically coming out of her stomach. You know?
Yeah.
And it's like, I really don't want to have to post this every single time I have a conversation with somebody like you, but it's like you have to kind of.
No, and frankly, my no is enough. You know, for someone who is an upstanding person, my no is enough. I say no to men in my spaces. This includes all men, men. And I don't care what your identity is. And if you are a man who hears my no and proceeds to violate my boundaries, then you have self-identified as a predator. You're already a predator, because you know that women are saying no and you are proceeding. There is no man who deserves to be in women's spaces. There is no man. I don't care how pretty he is. I don't care how much he passes. And frankly, the lengths that a man might go to disguise himself and to trick me, that makes me think he's more of a predator, frankly. You know, like now you've gone to great lengths to deceive me. That is more predatory. You know, men need to step up and accept non-conforming men into their spaces. You know, men who are non-conforming should definitely feel like they are able to go into men's spaces. But women are not human shields for non-conforming men, and it's hilarious and galling to me that they will use the example, or they'll try to say that, you know, these non-conforming men who put on woman face are unsafe in men's spaces. So they recognize that men are unsafe, and yet they want us to break our boundaries. You know, again, they are breaking and violating women's boundaries. Women are saying no. Many women have said no. I mean, even if some women say it's fine, it doesn't matter, because all it takes is one woman saying no, and that no should be respected. I mean, this tells you how little women are respected. You know, our no is not respected. Our boundary is not being respected in this whole thing.
Let's talk about women, if you don't mind. Let's talk about women who are affirming of trans identities and are quite antagonistic. You know what I mean? Like I've had this conversation several times with different women.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's just one the other day, and it's like it's disappointing to me, because it's somebody who, you know, I'll agree with her on several things. She'll post certain things and I'm like, yeah, that's fine with me. That's fine with me. That's fine with me. But then when it comes to the trans thing, then it's like, you're a bigot if you don't accept that trans women are women. And in that moment, this is a joke, but I kind of feel like more of a feminist than her. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, okay, wait a second. Like, who's the feminist here? Because you know what I mean? Because I know that at least that is part of her identity is as a feminist. But for some reason, this gets past the radar. For some reason, this, you know what I mean, this slides past, and it's sort of, and so why do you think that is? Why is it that there are some women who will completely embrace trans women as a category of woman?
I think it's not confusing at all. I think the programming is strong and effective. I think those of us who can see through the programming, that's rare. You know, if you look back at, you know, the Ash conformity experiments or the Milgram experiment, or a lot of those like early 50s experiments, you will see that most people are going to conform to the group. There is a reason why in the play Oedipus, you know, very classic Greek play that frankly a lot of psychology is based on. But there is a reason in that play. This is a man who has broken every single taboo that exists. He is not killed at the end of the play. He is banished. Banishment is the biggest cultural punishment, and it still is. You know, cancel culture is effective because banishment from the tribe is still an effective social tool. You know, the people.
And in this day and age, that means being banished from your job, or you know, any number of things, right?
They cannot go against the group, and frankly, some of them are not. Some of them know and go along with it, and some of them are also. They've bought it. They've swallowed it so fully that they actually believe it. You know, they've swallowed the programming so fully that they believe it. And again, you know, you're raised religious. You see how this happens. I mean, you know, we you know, if we look at, you know, I don't know, this would be an extreme example, but if we look at someone who, you know, is a suicide bomber, for example. And that'll be controversial. But if we look at this person and their life, and we see the action that they take, we can externally be like, well, you know, one, we can say that that was a bad action to take, you know, in terms of it harmed other people. Two, we could say, you know, that was like an anti like life preservation action that they took, you know, so they killed themselves in the process. So that's against our direct instincts. But we can also imagine that this person has so fully swallowed the religious programming that they've been raised with that they in their own minds believe in their own rightness. And I use that extreme example to say that is how fully captured people can become by the programming. So so I'm really not confused that many people are captured by this. I mean, I've lost a vast majority of my friends over my stance on this, because I'm in a theater world. I'm in the arts community. I mean, this is a
Sure, yeah.
community that, like, I mean, I've always had gay and lesbian friends. This is it's a very inclusive, to use their word, community. But now the community is entirely captured by the gender ideology, and thus, I'm ostracized from most of my friends who think
Sure.
I am a terrible bigot. Now, what they are unable to do is present any critical analysis of their side. They cannot, they can't address my arguments, nor they can't critique my arguments. They can't present counter arguments. Unfortunately, all they have is calling me a bigot or a transphobe.
Yep.
But again,
it's amazing how much that just gets pulled out. It's such a cliche at this point.
Something that you might be interested in reading is, and maybe your audience would too, is Stephen Hassan's something of the mind. It'll come to me, but Stephen Hassan's book, you'll find it if you look for him. Okay. And he basically goes through and talks about the tenets of what makes up a cult. And if you look at his model, he calls it a BITE model. It's like behavior, thought, emotion, and I think maybe, I don't remember what the I was, but this is all to say, he goes through all of these things of what makes a cult, and a lot of it is like thought terminating mantras. Like if you have a mantra that's just like a circular tautological mantra that requires no actual thinking and is just repeated ad nauseum, and that's the argument, you might be in a cult. If you find yourself in a group where to have disagreement means you can no longer have friendship, you might be in a cult. And that's why I would say, for example, my parents are in a religion rather than a cult. They can have friends who are outside of the religion. Scientologists cannot. That's a cult. If you ostracize non-believers by vilifying them and demeaning them, you might be in a cult. Scientology does this. So does gender ideology. It's very fascinating. Obviously I've read his book, and I want to be able to say more of his work more fluidly off the top of my head, but it's given me great insight into how this ideology works and how it operates, because as he breaks down how cults work, you can see these operations at work in this ideology, and you can also see it at work in how they groom. How this grooming operates, how effective it is, how they use different organizations, for example, to get in the schools or to get in. Like, why is Planned Parenthood captured? Why is the ACLU captured? Why is UN Women captured? Why are these giant organizations captured by this ideology, and how did that work? It's fascinating to look at. Yeah.
What I think maybe we should start winding down now. But before we, as we're winding down, what I'd like to talk about, because as we're talking about all of this, like one thing I was thinking earlier, we were talking about commercials, and I had an observation about commercials somewhat recently, where it's just like, you watch a commercial sometimes and they'll have these like amazingly inspirational messages, right? And you're just like, man, that just really gave me something to think about. And then all of a sudden it's like GMC, like drive our cars or something, and you're like, and it's so. So what I want to talk about is, I want to talk about this. So as a Christian, you kind of have this sort of belief that if you follow a certain steps and live your life a certain way, that it brings you closer to God, closer to Christ, right? I feel like the same principle exists within psychology, and the idea of, if you have problems in your life, take certain steps, and then you can have a better life. It's just this idea of whoever you are, there are steps that you can take to be more fully embodied, to be happy, to be content generally, despite some of the difficulties that life can bring. And I can see how the trans agenda sort of is trying to accomplish this same thing. It's trying to say, if you do these things, then you'll be happy, you'll find yourself, you know. That's kind of where I feel like, so the what I want to talk about in this is just that idea, is the complexity of being in a world where there's just so much delusion and distortion around us, and the difficulty in trying to find those nuggets of truth that actually do have meaningful impact and actually do help us to find our best selves. And the reason I bring up like the commercials and everything, and just how that connects with trans marketing and everything, is it all kind of goes in with this same idea of like, if you take these steps, your life will be better, you'll be happier, you'll find yourself. So as a psychologist, it seems to me that this is what depth psychology is sort of dealing with, right? Is kind of
well, yeah, and so depth psychology is it's a post-Jungian, post-Freudian psychology. So Jung and Freud both recognize the unconscious. So looking at the unconscious forces that affect us. So that was kind of their big contributions, among others. So depth psychology kind of goes along with that and says, yes, there are unconscious forces at work. Depth psychology, what it also does is it critiques culture. So it critiques what is at work in the culture. And so, so for an example would be like, so in the entire psychology industry is also an industry, and it is also captured by culture. As I said before, it is pushing this ideology onto its patients.
Sure.
It is selling something. It is marketing something.
Yeah.
And we can look, for example, at I've talked about this before. I use this example often when I'm talking to people about suicide, but the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Manual, calls PTSD a post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, this term was coined for war veterans, rape victims, and survivors of prostitution and trafficking. That's why and who it was coined for. If you have been through those experiences, if you have been through extreme trauma and you are having a stressful response, well, frankly, that's not a response, that's accurate. You're having an accurate response to the scenario. If I touch a hot pan and my hand recoils, I'm having an accurate response to my external stimulus. This is like having a fever in response to an infection. My fever is not a disorder. My fever is my body healthily responding to the infection. So this is all to say, there's just marketing everywhere. And one of the things that we can do is be extremely critical of the narratives that are coming at us from all angles, because they're coming at us, they are coming at us from our religions, they're coming at us from our televisions, they're coming at us from the government, they're coming at us from our education, and they're coming at us from our family of origins. So we can be highly critical of those narratives, and we can question into what is the underlying values and what are we really being sold, because frankly, there's not I guess there are maybe there could be certain things that could make your life feel better momentarily per se. However, if I have in my head that I'm seeking an end from pain, if I have in my head that I'm seeking an end from sadness, if I have in my head that I'm seeking an end from shame, that's a setup for failure. These are things that exist. Life is seasonal. You know, we live in a seasonal universe. There are seasons of things.
Yes.
I'm gonna meet sadness again. I'm gonna meet shame again. I'm gonna meet fear again. These things are going to come up again and again. So I cannot evolve above these things. What I can do is become better at meeting them. I can become more familiar with them. I can become more responsive to them. You know, if the first time I touch a hot pan, you know, it takes me a minute to be aware, this is just a random example, you know, maybe the second time I touch a hot pan, I'm like, oh yeah, that's hot, that's hot, that's hot. You know, now I've learned, I've become more responsive. So my pain pleasure response is more receptive. And my idea of feeling better is not about transcending my feelings, but it's about being a better feeler, being more responsive to my own feelings and being better at navigating those feelings when they arise. Because there's no it, you know, there's no one way, there's no one diet, there's no one exercise plan, there's no one religion, there's no one educational system, there is no one way. For anyone who's read Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha, you know, the sort of lesson of that book is you cannot find enlightenment by following the path of the Buddha. You must follow your own path.
If you meet the Buddha in the middle of the road, kill him.
Yeah, I haven't heard that one.
That's a Buddhist proverb, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, is it a Buddhist proverb?
Yeah.
Well, you can't follow someone else's path to happiness. You can't take the pill that's being offered by the television or your church or whatever. You necessarily can only find it because what you're seeking is not external to you. You know, what you're seeking is internal. So you know, again, this is why I always go back to embodiment. You know, the more I am able to fully embody myself, the more I can not dissociate from my body, not dissociate from my emotions, but fully embody those things, then the better I will be at feeling. I will feel better because I will be better at feeling my feelings. And what I'm seeking actually is in, you know, there are things that you can get that can feel nice. Like if I don't know, if someone gave me a nicer car than my current car, like that would be sweet. I think I would like it. But that thing in itself is as benign as the fabric that I was talking about. It's just a thing. It can't have any real fulfillment value. And those external slogans, you know, again, if you find a slogan, like let's say I heard a really great slogan on a commercial, I think there's a way in which maybe I could connect to it and maybe I could find something of value in it for me if I was first aware that it was being used as a marketing tool to get me to think a thing. You know, if I had a level of critical awareness where I was like, well, I see that they're using it to get me to buy a car. However, as I just personally sit with this idea, yeah, the notion that, you know, I don't know, nature is a place that calls to me, actually that does speak to me. You know, I think that a level of critical awareness about these things, even Religion. I see that some people's religious beliefs have real value for them, and I would never try to talk them out of it, even if I'm not in agreement with it.
Right.
um,
No, I mean, that's generally how I've had to handle the situation with my family is, you know what I mean? I'm like, I'm not going to fuck with you guys. You guys are living your life. You're doing your thing. And I see how that works for you. But for a variety of reasons, it's not working for me. And it's interesting though, because like when I started looking into young and individuation and sort of different concepts similar to that, I could see how it was like this funny realization of like what I was trying to do as a Christian, trying to follow a certain, steps in order to like live a life in accordance with God, or, just like be happy in that sense. When you could kind of just take the metaphor out and remove it from the tradition and the rituals and all that kind of stuff, I think the principle still applies. You know what I mean? Like you still, whether you're going to use all the principles of the Bible or the Quran or whatever, I think whatever human being is kind of on an equal playing ground. And that is that you have all these different tools, ideas and whatnot that you can use. And if you integrate them, they can help you in your life. And it took me a while to kind of realize that that religion, in some degrees, it kind of got me halfway there. But in order to get there all the way, it was going to require me to kind of move past that. And part of the reason that, for example, is just, I was very obese. That was one of the reasons why I got myself out of that dynamic, because I could see that there was something going on there that was having, here I was thinking that my life was supposed to be all fine and good and stuff. But then here I was, 300 pounds and unhappy and everything, and kind of being like, what's going on here? And what I see is that there was, because it was, this is the way I think of it, is that because there was so much of a focus on the spiritual and not the material, that I was ignoring the material, at my own expense, right? And so this kind of goes into the idea of deprogramming, and no matter who you are and where you come from, you're always going to have to deal with your past. You're always going to have to deal with your experiences, and you're going to have to try to learn how to process those in a productive way, right? And I don't think that demonizing them completely and just calling, like, for example, with my past in church and everything, if I just see that all as a complete waste of time and just like there was nothing good about it and it was all, then I'm going to live my life in animosity towards those people, to that experience. I made a choice based on certain things. I made a choice to leave it, but I also kind of understand that if I'm going to live in hostility and anger towards it, then I'm going to always carry that around with me. And so, interestingly enough, it kind of brings me around to the idea of forgiveness and the idea of just saying like, okay, I have to forgive it. I have to just leave it alone and go past it, right? So then you can kind of see that even in something like, if you reject Christianity outright and say, oh, it's just a bunch of garbage, can you at least acknowledge that forgiveness is an important tool to use? So this is kind of,
doesn't own the concept of forgiveness.
Sure.
Forgiveness is a concept that exists outside of religion. These things don't belong to any one religion. They are human emotions. Sure. They belong to all humans. We live in,
it's an important step, if I may say really quick. Like, it was an important step for me to just kind of sort of break the stratosphere in that regard and kind of like realize that even though the Bible holds a lot of these principles and ideas and stuff, those ideas are human. They come from the human experience. They come from our evolution, from our history as human beings, and they're a part of that. And so that's how I've been able to kind of like acknowledge them, but at the same time not keep myself constrained to that belief system, kind of get out of it. But continue, please.
Well, I just was going to add that in a very literal way, we live in a situated and relational universe. We're always uniquely situated and we're always uniquely relational. So even we're in two different, states and spaces.
I'm in BC, so I'm right above you.
Oh, you're right. Okay.
I think you're in Washington, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm in Washington. Yeah.
I believe that's the first time I saw you. If I'm not mistaken, I saw you at a demonstration at the hospital in the area or something like that. It was probably about 6 months ago now at this point.
Oh yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, you saw me at the hospital demonstration? Wow. Okay.
I'm pretty sure that's what it was. Yeah, because I was looking into, I was kind of looking for people who were reflecting my thoughts on the matter, and I found you. I think I think I found Jennifer Billick first.
Yep.
And then I think maybe I found you through her.
Yep.
But I saw that at the hospital, and then there was I can't remember what her name was, but it was a blonde woman from Israel who was talking about.
Yep, Alex Aaron. Yeah, she's great.
There you go.
Great. Yeah, Alex is great. So we live in a situated relational universe. So it means that even if instead of being, in a different place than me, looking at me, even if you were here seated next to me and we were both looking this way, even so, we would be differently situated and we would be differently related to the objects and environment around us. Sure. So I think there's a problem of fundamentalist thinking happening across all kinds of things, not just religion. But to speak to the religion, the problem is that there is this notion that there is one kind of relationship to have with God, whatever you want to call the God thing.
Sure. The God thing.
We're in just physically, just the physics of the matter is that we are in a situated relational universe. Now, this is a whole branch of philosophy that is very fascinating to cover, which is called phenomenology, which is about the basically the embodiment of being, the essences of being, which is embodiment. And again, the embodied nature of the universe is situated and relational. So if I told you, if I introduced you to my mom and I was like, and you started, having, interaction and a relationship with my mom, just like a friend relationship or whatever. And then I told you, no, that is not how you interact with, Vicky Sousa. You interact with her like this. This is the way to have a relationship with her. Sure. That would be bizarre. Sure. Because I have a very different relationship with her than you. I have a different relationship with her than my dad. That would be weird. I have a different relationship with her, frankly, than my sisters. I have a different relationship with her than her friends. We all have a different relationship with her. It doesn't mean that some of us are not having a relationship with her. If you met her and I was like, you do not have a relationship with her, you'd be like, well, that's weird. And talk to her all the time. Oh, the light's changing in my house.
Tell her I said hi, by the way.
I will. But so the notion that there would be one kind of relationship to have with God when we are all uniquely situated and uniquely relational, that's a bizarre take. Of course, each relationship is going to look uniquely unique, just as all of our relationships with the other human beings are uniquely unique. I don't have any friends where I have the same relationship with them as someone else, or the relationship can only look X way. But unfortunately, when you're going solely based on one book about how to have relationships,
sure.
Or it's even like if we did that, like of all the relationship books that are out there, like if we're like, this is
sure. Yeah, you want different perspectives, right?
Yeah, it's
there's a lot of different ways to look at the same thing.
Yeah, it's necessarily going to be unique to the individual. It's just, that's how it's going to be. It's just, it is unique because we're uniquely situated. It's unique because we have unique experiences. It's necessarily going to be unique because we come to it with a unique perspective and background and vision of things.
It's you use the word reality many times early on in our discussion, and it's one of the things that I've kind of divorced from my mind the idea of God and replaced it with reality. Like in some sense, I kind of deify reality, not necessarily in a specific, like I'm somewhat atheistic in my bend, but at the same time, I think I've sort of tried to exchange how I relate to the concept of God, which I did through church, and now I try to do the same thing by relating to reality. But it's just a thought basically on what you're saying. I think we should probably start winding down.
Yeah, we tried to before, but we should really do it.
Yeah. I'll just say this really quick before we leave. There's a couple of things that I wouldn't mind if at some point you feel like doing a follow-up to this discussion. There's some other discussions that I wouldn't mind having, but I don't think it would be the right time to get into it now. Just like one thing I wanted to talk about was I was watching your video and you were talking about smashing the patriarchy. And so that's something that I kind of want to get into more is the idea of smashing the patriarchy. I'm going to have some insights in that regard, but it's also just, I think another thing I'd like to talk about is just the idea of radical feminism and how males can relate to that concept. Like how is it as a male, how is it that I should perceive radical feminism, and what is it that and obviously that's something that we could get into, right? But we're not going to do that now, and hopefully maybe we can do this again. And
yeah, absolutely.
Go down, because I think that they do relate to the conversation that we've had so far. And I really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed
thank you.
This discussion with you. Yeah. Right on. I hope that anybody watching enjoys it as well. And you can find Amy on Twitter at Known Heretic, also on YouTube as well. And you can find me at House of This, it's House with a 3. And subscribe, comment, share, all that good stuff. And hopefully we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Amy. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here.
Okay.
Just so that I don't just hang